Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the inner workings of the creative process. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. Just a quick note to let you know that the Creative Tune-Up Kit I mentioned a few weeks ago is now available. If you are stuck in your creative process in any way, whether you're lapsed or never got started in the first place, even if you don't know what you might want to do, I made the Creative Tune-Up for you. More details at the link in the show notes. Check it out and start getting unstuck today. Musician Paul Bessenbacher, known to his friends and fans as PB, lives a genuine optimism best summed up in his signature statement, "It's gonna be great." PB has followed the flow of that sentiment from an undergraduate degree that let him experiment with every genre he could find, to learning recording engineering on the fly, to forming a band, more of a collaboration, called Opus Orange. Oh, and he also composes for film. We talk about all that and particularly about how he navigates the flow, avoids being bogged down by worry, and why we should all embrace failure and give each other grace for being imperfect. Here's my conversation with PB, Paul Bessenbacher, which I have a feeling will stick with you for a while. Welcome to the show, PB. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
So I am curious to know how you got started on your creative journey.
That goes back to early when I was maybe 7 or 8, and my dad bought my mom a piano for Valentine's Day because he thought it would be romantic, because pianos are romantic, and he didn't know how to play and she didn't know how to play, but there was a piano in our living room, and they were like, well, I guess we put our kids to lessons, right? And that's when it started. So I was about 7 or 8, and I had a wonderful teacher right off the bat, Dorothy Kilgus. She was wonderful. She is wonderful. And one of the things creatively, since this is a creativity subject, but creatively, she encouraged her students to, every year she would have a composition sort of contest. And so when I was 8, I was like, I don't know what that means. So I'm gonna enter this contest and compose something. And I as a pianist, you learn the key of C and you learn where to put your hands. And so I wrote this little march. It was an Olympic year at that time. I wrote this march in the key of C. I called it March of the Champions because of the Olympics. And ever since then, I wrote a track every year. And so it was great that as a piano teacher, though a lot of them focus on learning and repertoire and technique and learn the classics, she always encouraged exploration creatively, which, that's formative for me, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking to my own music lesson experiences, and they definitely did not ever include, by the way, you should write your own thing.
Right.
So I have to think that having that chance, and not even just, you could write your own thing, but please do write your own thing. There's such a huge difference between those two, that having that happen at that age definitely would have made much more of an impression than you would think, which
right.
It sounds like it certainly did in your case.
It certainly did. And I didn't know that was rare, of course, because that's all I knew. But in retrospect, I'm eternally grateful to her for that encouragement of that sort of side of the brain that we don't get to. There's so much risk that we all sort of feel when we, like, whether we improvise or, like, even like for me to do a podcast where I'm just speaking is like, it's in the moment and there's risk involved. I might say something wrong. And same with creative composition, like that is rarely encouraged, and there's rarely a safe place to be able to fail or like, get wrong, do things wrong. But in composition, it is a kind of an improvisational thing where I don't know how it's going, and that kind of safety. it's good to have a place where you're safe to do that.
Definitely. So that was when you were 8 with piano, but you have quite the array of various guitars, banjos, etc. on the wall behind you. So how did you move from piano into other instruments?
In junior high, my next instrument was bass. In junior high, I remember I started to get into jazz, and the junior high had a jazz ensemble. And as a pianist, I mean, everyone's a pianist, so like, there's no shortage of pianists. But there was a shortage in bass players. So like, at that point, I remember they had an old Fender Rhodes bass, which I sure wish I had one, but because they're awesome. But it's like a keyboard bass. So like, as a pianist, I was sort of somehow relegated to play the bass lines on this keyboard bass. And then that quickly was like, well, why don't I learn how to play bass? And I got an electric bass at that point, and I even tried tuba. No, I'm not good at anything that I have to use wind for, but so I got an electric bass in junior high, and so that kind of like got me going on another instrument besides piano. And then I also had an older brother who was who listened to all sorts of music, and he got a guitar, and I would borrow it sometimes, an acoustic guitar, and so I would kind of fiddle around on that. The cool thing about piano as a foundation is that you have the entire palette, the entire orchestra, essentially, from the tubas and the low end to piccolos and to glockenspiels on the high end, and then you have everything in between that we sort of live in typically. So the foundation of a piano is, even graphically, it's almost like this. It's almost like graph paper for music. You have everything that you kind of need to jump off into dabbling with other instruments. Even being able to understand a guitar, also a sort of has a graph layout. Knowing piano and theory and chords and stuff. So like, piano's it's a good instrument for any musician to know, because I was able to jump off into other instruments and try things out I didn't get lessons in that stuff, but I would just kind of falter away and fumble my way through learning instruments. And, same with like the banjo or the ukulele, okay, it's a new tuning, let me figure that out. But just because I had the foundation in piano and theory, I was able to fumble my way through other instruments, which has been a necessary skill as a composer, is to have the, like I said earlier, the palette of colors and be able to make things, all sorts of things at any time. So like, that's why it's a good skill. It's a good skill that I will continually try to learn instruments.
That's cool. My mother was a lot like that. When she was in high school, she played flute, and she would walk up to other people before the football game and say, "Can I try your trombone? You can try my flute." And so she kind of picked up little bits of everybody's stuff, not enough to, compose on them or anything, but still to play around with it. And my brother has the disgusting ability to just play anything he wants. I'm not jealous. Really, I'm not.
Yeah.
Liar, pants on fire. But no, I think I had never really thought about the piano as a springboard to everything else, but that makes sense to me. Even though I only took piano for a couple of years, you do get all the keys, all the chords, all of that kind of stuff, and then just translate it to everything else. It must make it so much easier.
It does. And it's, even in college, when you go to music school or anything, the piano proficiency is like what you have to do, even if you're not a piano major. And I think they do that for that reason. Like, it is a formative foundational instrument. And yeah, I'm glad I was brought up in that way, and it's a foundational way to understand sort of music and music theory and chords and harmony, as opposed to like if you just played flute, for example, those kinds of music theory and how chords work together might not totally make sense because you're only playing one note at a time. It's a little harder. You don't have necessarily the full sort of what happens when you play these together,
Yeah. So what did your parents think about you turning into a music nerd right before their eyes? Were they supportive? Were they wary? Were they some of each? How did that go?
There was definitely there was a little bit of each, but at the heart of it, they were very supportive. Yeah, when I decided to go to college for classical piano performance, that was a moment where they were all completely behind me. They were all for it, and I didn't go to a music school to get a career, which a lot of people think of college as a career building thing. And my goal in going to music school was to learn music, like to learn classical piano. I knew I wasn't going to be a classical pianist on stage. I knew I didn't want to teach. Those are kind of the trajectories career-wise for people that go into performance as a degree. But I knew that wasn't it. My goal really was just to learn this art form as deeply as I can for 4 years, and that it was valuable moving on to my career, but it wasn't necessary, yeah. So yeah, my parents were supportive though. They totally backed me up along the way, and they knew the challenges of being creative and in a career is a tricky thing in this world. And they knew those challenges, but were behind me and supportive, and I'm grateful to that.
Did they have any kind of creative sidelines, hobbies, things like that themselves, since the piano was sort of an odd but interesting Valentine's gift?
Yeah, right. My dad was a woodworker, and he would go into his woodworking shop on the side of the house and make all sorts of stuff, from kaleidoscopes to he made his own woodworking bench, and to various things around the house. And that was his outlet. My mom, she sews and does embroidery and that kind of thing. So she has a room with a bunch of fancy sewing machines, and that's her outlet creatively. So yeah, they both. My dad definitely had a creative outlet. He wouldn't think of himself, probably, I don't know, as creative. He was a hard working air conditioning and cooling, mechanic. That's what he did. But he did, on weekends he would go out and that would be his outlet. Yeah, my mom still does so, and she's great at it, and she loves it. Yeah.
So it wasn't completely alien to them when you turned into a little musician in the making.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. At some point, you got to just go with the flow of things. I don't think they had a vision or necessarily as they saw me progressing in music, they just, as we all kind of do, and kind of just go with what you're good at. And it wasn't, that makes it so there's not necessarily surprises or letdowns.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. So in terms of that flow, since you said you didn't go to school to become a classical musician, you just wanted to get as much understanding of music as you could. Did you have any idea when you were still in those 4 years where you wanted to go when you were done?
In those 4 years, I've always been kind of scatterbrained in music. Like I played in all sorts of different ensembles and different genres, from bluegrass to indie rock to folk to metal and I would just say yes to everything and really enjoy and thrive in sort of the variety. And so that, at the same time, trying to make sure I got through my recitals and they call them juries, juries and recitals, and make sure I graduate somehow. So like, I was scatterbrained in the best way. I mean, that's the time to do it and it was super fun, but that variety moving on post into somewhat of a career in music, I found, I mean, I had always composed and written songs and that kind of thing, but that vision kind of honed a little bit for me. I knew I was trying to, like, working with bands and learning the studio aspect of things, which I didn't, like microphones and cables and signal flow and preamps and compressors and EQs and going into recording device. Like at that time we had, like, they were called ADATs, which was like this tape machine, 8-track tape machine, or a 4-track cassette, or like all of that, the sort of engineering side, the production side of music, I was starting to get into and trying to learn from just watching my friends that were good at it. And after college, I had a connect through school that I went to this guy's studio and I just kind of hung out for like a few days, and eventually he started to ask me to do things and like record this. And so I had to learn on the spot. It was kind of like an internship, but it was not an internship. I just kind of like showed up and didn't leave, and learned how to, whether it's programming MIDI and like setting up microphones and making sure that person has their right headphone mix, and like those kinds of really studio production skills that I didn't learn, at the piano, obviously. Mm-hmm. So that playing in all those various bands and then learning music production, that's where I'm getting to with this. Those two things kind of have guided me to want to, write music. At that point, I wanted to write for anything, whether it was, and my early post college stuff was like, I wrote for like a puppet theater stuff, or at different theater shows, or an indie film, or whatever I could. And that's when I was eventually, his name's Mark, he hired me as like an assistant. So that was great. And I would kind of write different cues for, if he had an independent film, I would be able to like sit in and write something. And that fueled my sort of love of both production and composition, coming together, for often to picture or often to a stage thing. So there was a scoring element. It wasn't just writing music. It was like interactive with something visual, which was exciting. And I really thrived and loved that. And so that's how that, and when you get hired as a composer, having some of those genres that, and the variety, and helps sort of make you a little more viable. I can, it helps me to be able to turn on a dime. If somebody wants a big band track, sure, I got you. If somebody wants a heavy metal track, yeah, I got you, because I did those things. And so I can kind of adapt to an assignment or a scene or whatever is called for.
Yeah, there's a lot of merit in the go try all the things. I mean, you literally said a couple minutes ago, I said yes to everything,
Yeah.
which, you can't possibly have been thinking at the time because someday I'm going to need everything. And yet here you are. So it sounds like that just all has come together beautifully.
It has, and beautifully is. I mean, like it to be like it's hard. Like, to be honest, it's really hard, and so it's often trying to do this for a living is not a beautiful hustle. It's hard work to land the next gig and to get the next thing. So uh, sometimes it is coming together beautifully when like things are busy and I'm working and there's a energy, and it's less beautiful when I'm out there not doing music and instead trying to find the next job. And like that's really a part of being creative as well, that it balances that other side, which they don't really teach you in school. And I mean, you maybe take one class on like how to make a living, but it doesn't really get to the heart of it. But yeah, I'm grateful to do music at any degree, and I want to always do it. And it's a hustle for me anyway.
Yeah.
Not for everyone.
Did you kind of, I mean, I'm sort of interpolating here from what you were saying a couple minutes ago, so tell me if I'm wrong. But it seems like through the process of I'm just going to show up and hang out in this studio, which I feel like is a brilliant strategy if you can get away with it, you probably were exposed to a lot of the things that you needed to learn to figure out how that hustle worked. Does that sound right? Has that just kind of taken you from one step into the next?
That did definitely help, because this was a working music production studio and they had jobs. I didn't know how they got the jobs. They had some jobs. It wasn't like a heyday of jobs, and I did see like them hustling, but at the time I was really focused on like, how do I learn how to be like an engineer and do all these things that Mark was asking me to do, and do it quickly and do it well. But I did see sort of behind the scenes of the hustle, and the sort of the downside of that. Was, at some point he had to let me go. He couldn't afford me because they didn't have the work. So like that was in Chicago, and at that point when that happened, my wife and I made the choice to leave Chicago because the work, like again, creative work, and this was post 9/11, when the economy was like, not many people were just spending money on creative original music at that point, and it really kind of stung. So we made the choice to move to Los Angeles, open a 0% credit card and put it on the moving company, and like get out. And like, it was a risk. We didn't have any money or savings or anything, but we came out to LA because there was more of an industry for original music.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did the hustle, and eventually landed a job writing music at a music production company called Ad Music, which became Emoto Music, which became eventually the music production company that I now run with my business partner, Paul Schultz.
Wow. So it's still just all progresses, even though, I mean, and I hate to put it that way because it makes it sound like it was all just obvious and easy and, oh, look, there's the next thing. And I'm pretty sure that's not how that went. Yeah. And yet it did all land where it seems like everything was supposed to land.
Things, yeah. I mean, I like we said, like you got to follow things. I prefer to see where energy goes rather than sort of have visions where my life is going to go or whatever. Even with composition, like I try to let it lead me as it happens, instead of saying I'm going to write this kind of track, or I'm going to land this kind of job. It's kind of, I like the the flow aspect of both in whether it's that life progression like that, and saying yes to everything and see where it goes and being open. I approach that in general with most things that I'm creating too as well.
It seems wise to me, just because I think when we get too attached to the idea of what we want something to be, we don't leave room for it to show us things that we might not have seen otherwise.
I wholeheartedly sort of agree and sort of live by that, which is, one of your pre-questions was, what has surprised you? And I was like, I try not to have those expectations, so then I just don't get surprised. And in that same sort of context, letting it, not expecting things or not forcing things to be what we think they should be allows it to become something else and maybe become better than we would have envisioned otherwise.
Yeah. And I think it lets us be more curious about it, which also lets it bloom too, because then you can just go, what's that?
Yeah.
Instead of, I didn't want that part. Make that go away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I follow that sort of that mentality and that gear, like I said, like with writing and with production, and being open to even how to record something differently or how to perform something differently, or there's not the right sound that I need to find it. I just need to be open to try and mess things up and see what happens. And I think the messiness, especially, or when you don't know, anything goes. So you can really, when you don't have that vision, anything, you can just try stuff, and it really opens up every opportunity. And there's so many, with recording, for example, there's so many right things to do, quote unquote, right things to do, with oh, this is a good kick drum sound. Sure, but why not, approach it from some other way and mess it up? And that's where a lot of good things happen. There's fertile ground when you let go of what should be and find something else.
Yeah. So the word that's coming to mind as you're talking about this is trust. And I'm wondering, did you have the sense of trust before you started following the flow and letting things kind of show themselves to you? Or did you develop it along the way when maybe other things didn't work? Or how did that come together?
When you say trust, what are you directing that trust in? You're in yourself, or trust of what?
I think it's got to be yourself, and also the process, and that whatever it is that's trying to come through you is going to have something to show you that's worth your time, rather than, oh, this is just this side thing, and why did I waste the last 3 hours on it? I think it could come up in multiple ways, so you can take that whatever way seems right.
One of the things that I say a lot, going into something, is it's going to be great. And that little phrase, there's trust in there. Even trusting that phrase, you could be looking at something really challenging and be overwhelmed and be like, oh God, how am I going to do this? And then just say, it's going to be great. And then you just take the next step, and there is trust in, it will be great. You just got to do things. You got to do the next step to see what will happen. But there is trust in and also being okay that if it's not what you expect, or if it's not that great, you're going to be fine. That's another realization, especially when people get worried about and I get worried about, the next job or making sure bills are paid and, all those kinds of things, knowing that you're going to be okay and you're going to figure it out, and we're going to take the next step, and that's going to lead to another step, and that's going to lead to another step, and you navigate your way, and maybe you're worse off from somebody else's perspective, but maybe you're better off from your own perspective, and that it's going to be great as it's a joke amongst my friends, but because music and almost anything creative can be so fussy, and we get caught up in details and perfections and making sure everything's just right, but letting that go and realizing it's going to be great. That there is a degree of trust in that. Maybe it's an optimism, but it's also a sense of, it's not just optimism. It's a realism. I try to be realistic about this stuff, and it's with that comes a peace at whatever outcome.
Yeah. Have there ever been moments when that seemed like it wasn't working for you, or you thought, oh boy, it's been great up till now, but this time it's going to get me? Or have you just always managed to keep that at bay?
It really is it's a constant thing that if say the current state of business is not great, in terms of, income. That's a nice simple one. That's not that great, but how we react to that situation can really it can either cause a downward spiral. If I let myself get down and, what's the opposite of it's going to be great? It's going to, this is going to suck. This is going to be, I don't know what I'm going to do. That kind of mentality, it can be a downward spiral, both in terms of how you produce, how you react, and mentally and physically. It can be really hard on yourself. I'm going to say myself. So even in the not so great situations, keeping it open and knowing that the worst case scenario isn't that bad, and you're going to figure it out. You're going to figure out the next step. So it is something you gotta live in that, and constantly remind yourself so that you don't let yourself downward spiral. I'm saying you, but I really should be saying so that I don't let myself downward spiral.
Oh, I don't know. I think there are probably a lot of people who are going to listen to this who will find themselves thinking, maybe this is worth a try. I hope so, anyway.
Yeah, I hope so.
So you mentioned earlier how working with something visual changed the way that you record or write or both, or the process. And I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, the working to picture, whether it's film or an advertisement or stage, there's a one, it's collaborative. I'm collaborating with the director. I'm collaborating with what I'm seeing, and what I'm creating is not my own. It's truly I'm serving a purpose creatively. I'm more of a I don't know if this is totally right, but sometimes I make the distinction between artist and craftsman.
Mm-hmm.
and I guess it's craftsperson maybe, but where sometimes an artist, and especially these days, we think of art as being sort of ego, and this is what I need to express to the world. In the case of scoring something and collaborating with directors and with picture and all that stuff, it really becomes like a craft. It becomes a skill that I really enjoy sort of honing and working with someone, and I'll do what I think is right, and the director will say something that, oh no, try doing this instead. So then I have to react and translate words that are not musical into musical things. And often you, like we said before, you can go places and it ends up being a place that I didn't foresee and is better than I could have done without that collaboration. Like that is a beautiful sort of fertile ground of creativity, is being collaborative. And I think working to picture, you get that as opposed to, like, I don't know, if I just wanted to express my emotions in a song, or that, that's sort of the artistic thing, which I do, and I love that as well. But to picture, it's really serving a purpose, and it's to make that project, that visual thing, come to life and really elevate that. And it isn't to serve my artistic output, and a lot of being in the creative world for a living, you have to put your ego aside anyway, because you are commissioned to do something for someone else. And that's a good, I love that. It kind of hones the craft skill and doesn't become about me, and it becomes about, elevating that project.
So how much of a project like that is inspired by the visual, and how much is information from the director, and how much is purely you? I mean, I'm sure it varies, but how does that all come together?
Yeah, all of those are sort of like sliders on the mixing board that get balanced, and there's never any there's never any like fixed ratio of those things. But as a composer, I get influenced by really everything. If, say, it's a film and there's a scene and it's dark and there's some wind, and then so that's the audio thing, and so I'm gonna react to the score needing to fit in with the sound that's already there, and the emotion that's coming on the screen, or the feeling that needs to be there. And often that's the director's sort of saying, literally, this needs to sound like this needs to have this energy, etc. So there's feedback from the picture and from the director, and sometimes all sorts of other people want to say what's working and what's not working, so being open to letting these dynamics move what I do and influence what I do to be something else, and not holding what I make too preciously. Mm-hmm. And that's where the artist and crafts person really, there's a line there that sometimes can be emotionally challenging when say I write something I love and the director's like, ugh, that's not right at all. And then, being keeping my ego in check is a good constant also reminder of how to approach this sort of the work of commissioned artisan in this case, in a case like that.
It reminds me of Faulkner's advice about killing your darlings. The things that you love, maybe the things that need to die. Have you ever taken something that somebody said this isn't what we want, and you loved it and turned it into something else afterwards? Or has that just kind of gone by the wayside?
For sure. Yeah. All the time. I mean, like, I'm fine if somebody doesn't love stuff. I mean, when we as artists put out, it's up there for people to thumbs up or thumbs down. So I'm used to people not liking things, and that's great, and I'm comfortable with that. And when they don't, I mean, I try not to put out anything I don't like, like, even when it's a tough project and they're asking me to do something that I don't think is a good direction. Trying to have integrity creatively, I try to take that direction that I might not really want to do, and it's a challenge, and make it the best it can be creatively. So I try to keep that integrity as far as a creative output, no matter what the project. So when somebody doesn't like something that I do like, I love repurposing or and seeing where it can go. Sometimes sometimes they can live on their own. Sometimes they can become a song. Sometimes I love the idea of repurposing, for sure.
So I want to make sure that we get to Opus Orange, because that's an important thing. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us how that band came to be. I know that sometimes it's just you, sometimes there are other people, so it's a little bit different than what most people typically think of as a band. So I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah. Since we talked about this, when I moved from Chicago to LA, at that time, people had websites, and I remember to sort of have your reel, and I needed to have like some music reel to show people that might need a composer. So like I got the domain opusorange.com, which was just like Opus being a collection of works, like in the classical world, they'll do it's almost like an album in the classical sense. Opus 9 is this person's ninth group of works that includes maybe a handful of tracks or whatever, compositions. So that came from my classical background, and Orange came from, I was in a band called Orange Was the Color of Her Dress, which is a Charles Mingus song. Anyway, so I quickly didn't overthink that at all, and I just got this domain name and put my reel up, and I would send it to potential employers and say, hey, check this out, or directors, or anything that it was a way to show my reel in the email and virtual world. So jumping forward from that move, it just, that those words kind of stuck together for me. And then like the first thing that we released, I remember I got a ukulele because I went camping with my buddy and he had a ukulele. I was like, what's that? And I kind of picked it up and fiddled around and fumbled along on it. And so the first Opus Orange album EP was sort of songs that were born from flailing at on a ukulele. And that's how that was born. But Opus Orange is me and sort of my outlet as an artist in anything that I might want to release. And outside, like in the swimming in the pool with me, is a bunch of great friends and artists that some, like, we all, it's a collective of sorts. And so it depends on, who's available and wants to do stuff. Because in LA, everyone does everything and they're all hustling and they're not always available. And we all, have different gigs and different stuff. So having a collective of people to call on when we want to get together is great, because if someone can't make it, someone else can, and it becomes a nice little organism. And it allows also for me to to do what I want instead of, what we release isn't just band music. There's a film soundtrack, a couple film soundtracks on there. There's a solo piano album. So it allows me to have fun with what I release and not just be tied to a band or a sound or even a genre.
That actually sounds so much cooler than just I have a band and we do cover tunes.
Sure. It's fun. It's always moving. It's like a living organism that kind of moves around with sort of my songs or my creative personality at the center of it.
It also reminds me of, the way that you went through undergrad, trying everything, going back and forth between all these things. So you're still playing with all these different ideas and putting them together, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
So I know that Opus Orange has existed for a while and gone through all of these different permutations. Is there trajectory feels like the wrong word considering the conversation we've already had here, but have you noticed ebbs in the flow of how it has grown and changed, or has it just been a little bit of this and a little bit of that without that kind of overall pattern? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And trajectory is not the right word, because we allow these things as this living organism moves along. For a great example is, during the pandemic, it became really isolated, and eventually, my good friend and drummer James and we would mask up and go into our studio, just the two of us, and we got into a good sort of zone creatively that nobody could have foreseen that. But I would be on guitar or something and have a vocal mic set up, and he'd be on drums, and we just kind of found this creative groove that we followed along and would go in, and then eventually set up some mics and started recording stuff and being a little bit more. I was following the energy of where James and I happened to be moving in, and recorded some songs with just the two of us. And then event and songs that were written in that space and in that energy space. And then to fill it out, I ended up, the bass players in Sacramento, and so I sent him tracks and that kind of thing. And a lot of people did this during the pandemic as musicians, because we still need to make music. So it was a little bit of sending files and whatnot. But this album that we're releasing right now was born of that. So I didn't know that was a trajectory a year and a half ago, but I followed it, and I love music. Can be especially as I release things, they're little snapshots of a moment in time, and and then once that happens and you move on to the next thing, that's great. So this is a snapshot for me, and it has the album's called Object Lessons, and it has maybe it has a little bit more teeth than our previous stuff. But anyway, I'm really proud of it, and excited to release it. And that's, we've released 2 songs, and we have a third single coming up in August, and the album coming out at the end of August. So we're excited about that. And then James and I because he's also here with me in Santa Monica. So he's the one that I see weekly, and we make noise often. So we'll see where the next thing leads and continue to not have a trajectory.
Have you noticed, since you talk about these things being a snapshot of a moment in time, with the pandemic in particular, but maybe not exclusively, have their reaction to music changed, especially in that 18 months since it started?
Gosh, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell reactions. Everyone consumes music differently, whether it's on a playlist on Spotify, for example, where they put it on, or a listener might put it on and not even know what band is playing. They're just like playing a playlist, and to little 15-second snippets on TikTok, to like everyone's consuming music in a way that, I can't begin to understand how all the different ways that people consume things, but it is hard to tell. It's hard to tell, like, and the effect of how music is being received, that's being released during and now, and it, yeah, it's hard to guess any of that stuff. And as an independent artist, it's also hard to get things heard amongst all the noise. And I know that, it's Opus Orange. The music we make isn't gonna be pop radio, and like that's I'm not trying to be, and so like I'm grateful if one person hears it. That's awesome. And at the same time, I want as many people to hear it as possible. So the sort of marketing aspect of releasing music as an independent artist is tough, and like you need to have a social media presence. And I'm just not that. I'm not that guy. There's and people that I love that are really successful, like they have a thing and they're able to be quippy, and I just make music,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough out there to market it and get ears on it if you're not pushing it with some razzmatazz.
Yeah, and social media can totally take over your life, and then you go, why am I spending all my time on Facebook instead of making music too? So yeah, I just wondered if there was, more feedback than usual or anything like that in the last year, just because I feel like being so isolated, we all paid more attention to the things that we could get our hands on that kind of improved the mood, and music is the first thing that I think of for that usually. Netflix probably is second, even though I did not spend my whole pandemic watching Netflix like I know a lot of other people did.
Sure.
But yeah, I feel like that, we appreciate things differently, having gone through this year of where did everybody go? Where did my life go? What's happening?
Yeah.
So
I remember at the beginning, the live streaming was a good outlet for a lot of artists. And I did it a few times, and it was necessary. Like I was grateful to have this sort of tool that wasn't utilized as deeply as it became utilized post March 2020. But so it was interesting. And like I kind of loved the back and forth that happened with those few that I did. And it was necessary. It was like, I needed to do this. Like it was, that's what I mean by necessary. It felt good to do that. And it's cool because the live streaming, you have people all over the world, or at least the country, that can come hang out and listen to music with you, as opposed to if I play a club locally, like you just, that's impossible for most. So like having that, it's right here, and you just click on it, and then we can hang out, and I'll play some songs. That was an interesting dynamic, and it was kind of short lived for me as an artist. I enjoyed it in the first few months, and then I switched gears. Like I said with James, I switched gears to like I needed to make, like I followed that. First I needed to reach out to some people via the live streams, and then I needed to like, okay, I did that. I needed to make music. And that's where this new record comes from.
That brings up an interesting sort of balance in that relationship between needing to perform for people and needing to create something new. How does that tend to fall out for you?
I always need to create music in some way, and the performance thing is I do love it, and I really love playing clubs and that kind of thing. We just don't do it that often, but performing really does sort of scratch an itch for me that I really love. And it's hard work. You got to, as far as rehearsing and like making sure things are up to snuff with whoever the ensemble is at that time. But I do love playing live. It's messy. It's who knows how the sound is going to be. You're not in control of that, so you let it go. And who knows if my voice is going to hold up. And I'm not like a singer trained wise. So like sometimes I'll hear back old live things. I'll be like, oh God, I'm really out of tune. But it's fine. Like at the time it felt right. And I love that the live thing. I mean, there's so much at risk. An audience you have one shot at like playing the song. You don't get to like do it again, which you don't have that risk in the studio. You can take it again. You can take it until you're happy. But in a live scenario, the risk factor is like, it's so special. It creates an energy, or there is an energy because there's risk that I really enjoy.
I want to say that's so interesting because so many people wouldn't say that. And yet it totally goes with everything you've said before this, that would be something that would just totally work for you.
Yeah, it does work for me. I wish I was better at like singing and performing and being exciting on stage, but I do love it. I thrive on the energy that back and forth from whoever's listening. I thrive on the energy of the risk that I could screw up, but just go for it, and like it's going to be great. And that kind of no safety net. That's pretty fun. I really enjoy the live thing, but not everyone is made for that. I read a little bit of your bio about how this sort of stage fright, not stage fright, but like just a little bit of pulling back from the performance for you, right? Did you have that?
Oh, I have had wicked stage fright that has largely kept me from performing for years, though it's also been a question of I sing, I don't play an instrument, so I can't just go and accompany myself somewhere. So that does make it a little bit more complicated, though. Sure. Eventually you also have to say to yourself how much of that is an excuse so that I don't have to deal with the stage fright. Yeah. So yeah, I know the stage panic thing real well.
Yeah. It's such an interesting yeah, I mean, it's a risk. It's a risk, and for me, I need to be open to fail. I need to be okay with failing, and I need to be okay with that. And that's kind of what gives it an energy for me, like just a feeling that you can't get without that. It's
Yeah. And that's so interesting too, because, failure for most people is the thing that we most desperately want to avoid.
Yeah.
And I've been, thinking about that whole idea a lot lately, just because it's come up in different contexts. And, even though I know that partially fuels my own stage fright issue and is not my friend, it's one thing to realize intellectually that failure actually may be the best thing that ever happened to you. It can be the quickest way to learn something, to progress in something. Failure actually is probably your best friend.
Yeah.
But it's another thing entirely to get past that ingrained fear of it and live by it.
Yeah. I wish there was more sort of grace extended to everyone to fail. I'm not a commentator on the social media aspect, but like there's just so much perfection and so much, people are so curated and careful on presentation. And maybe that feeds it too, but I just wish that we were allowed, not that we're not allowed it, but it just feels like there's not enough allowance for failure, or even allowance for being like down or sad, or if there's a stigma that like, oh, if you're crying, let me cheer you up. You don't necessarily need to cheer them up. Like, go through it. Let people go through that stuff. I mean, it's almost like people that will like if you have a fever, your body heats up because it needs to kill a virus or kill a bacteria, typically. But when we get fevers, this is typically broad stroke, take a leave and kill that fever. But really, if you let your body heat up like it's supposed to, and it'll kill the fever, that we don't allow those extremes to really, because it's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant, you're going to feel terrible. But if allowing it makes you stronger and better. I wish there was more grace for failure and for being down and even being angry, and not everything needs to be you don't need to always put water on the anger or put cheerfulness when you're sad. Yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling, but
but it's great rambling. Because I people who are listening can't see me, but I've been sitting here nodding my head so much, because it's like, yeah, we're afraid of the pain, and so we just want to make it go away.
Yeah.
When there's so much good stuff that can come out of the pain if we let ourselves be there with it, and we deny ourselves that full range of life if we say, oh, no, I'm sad, I need someone to cheer me up, please make me feel better because I don't want to be sad, rather than saying, okay, what's going on with this sadness? What does this mean? What can I channel it into?
Yeah.
So many people love sad songs, right? They just don't want to feel sad. They love sad poems and sad movies. They're cool with it happening to somebody else.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
But we don't want to experience it ourselves. And you mentioned the social media and the perfection thing. And I think that that's a lot of it too. There's the perfectionism and the tendency to compare ourselves to everybody else are probably not exactly a full circle on the Venn diagram, but they overlap an awful lot. And it, at the core, so much of that comes from the idea that we're not good enough. And then you go and you look at social media, you look at Instagram and all of the beautiful pictures, and what do you see? Yeah, you just get more of this, I'm not good enough. Yeah. And you're chasing after something that doesn't exist, because perfection is mostly a myth. And it's all because you've let everything teach you that you're not good enough when everybody's good enough. We're all fine. and we're all able to do things, so many more things, but we're so scared that we're not good enough that we don't want to fail, and then we don't take the chance and try.
Yeah. Growing up in learning jazz and improvising, you don't learn how to improvise, you just do it. But one of the sort of like guru statements, I forget who told me it, but like when you're taking a solo and you hit a wrong note, hit it again and maybe hit it a couple more times and it starts to sound intentional. And because of that, like it kind of that sort of advice was like, oh, I can screw up.
Yeah.
I thank you for allowing me to mess up, in quote unquote, even though it's not really improv is improv. But it really did allow those wrong notes and allow those mistakes, and then play with them, see what happens to those wrong notes and those mistakes. Because maybe it's not wrong.
Yeah. You're reminding me, in the last couple of months, I started to a certain extent tackling the stage fright by recording songs on TikTok.
Awesome.
Because I back in January, I stumbled on the fact that you can do duets on TikTok, and I was so intrigued by it that I was like, I have to try this. I have to try this. If you had told me the day before that I would end up the next day recording a duet and posting it on TikTok, I would have called the nice men in the white coats to come get you. But, that's literally how it happened. And the first one I did was a sea shanty, not realizing that this was this huge trend. So I was amazed at how many people actually looked at it. I was kind of freaked out, actually. But I made up a harmony to go with the thing. So I had to learn the tune and then make something up and record it and not drive myself crazy before the afternoon was over in the process. Right. But that kind of got me playing with, all of these standards that I know well enough that there were a couple times that I recorded something, and then for the next 3 days, my right brain would just be playing with it when I was, doing the dishes or whatever else. And I would notice all of these weird little fun things happening. And I got to where I would be in the middle of it and I would be like, you have totally lost the plot, sister. Right. Where are you? This doesn't harmonize. This doesn't anything. And yet I would find a way back to where I was supposed to be.
Uh-huh.
And I found that so fascinating. It was like, okay, as long as I know where I'm going, it doesn't really matter what happens in between, as long as I can get back there. And that's what your comment reminded me of. I had never really played with anything like that before. And it just was so fascinating.
It allowed you to try whatever path you wanted to get from A to B.
Yeah. And it was really freeing to just be like, I can play with this and I have no idea what's coming. And I mean, this was mostly me in my kitchen, it wasn't something I was recording, but it was like, wow, look at that. That's great. I don't know how many people play with things enough to discover that you can think you've totally messed up in the middle, but still bring yourself home by the end of it. And it's all okay.
Yeah. Right. Freedom in failure. It's important.
Yeah. And is it really failure if you manage to get back on your feet by the end?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's not failure. Even changing the idea of what is failure, failure could just be freedom and exploration rather.
Right. Yeah. Let's call it that. Let's start a movement and call it that instead of failure and get people unfreaked out about falling flat on their faces.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Maybe there should be a whole section of Instagram devoted to, I fell flat on my face. This is what I did. Here it is. Let's make this normal. I would love that, actually. Yeah,
I think there is. They just call them fail videos or something.
I guess, but
we gotta change the perspective.
Yeah, because that's not normalizing it. That's making fun of people who fail, which is not what we're going for here.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing it's a lofty goal on the social media to not be made fun of.
Yeah. I don't know. And now I'm hoping that somebody who listens to this will pick up on it and find a way to make that work, because I think that would be a breath of fresh air for everybody that we all need.
Right.
So see, your ramble led us to great places.
All
I
right.
love it.
Yeah. You got to let it happen. See where it goes.
You do.
Yeah.
So there was one other thing that I wanted to be sure to ask you, because you've used the word messy a couple of times. So perfect to go here right now. I think people are afraid of messy too. And yet, obviously, messy has been really important in your process. So I'm wondering if you can maybe tell us a little bit more about how messy works for you. And, if you have any advice to people for embracing the mess, I think that would be great.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm in the thick of creating the room and the cables and the instruments start, taking off the wall and leaning up against here and leaning up against there. And sometimes that leads me to because of the mess, you see things, I can see my room a little differently. And maybe I pull out an amp that I haven't used because I didn't see it back there, or rearranging and messing things up is sort of a fun. It's something I try to do whenever I'm creating, even recording. I'm getting better at recording things. There's people that are recording engineers, and that's not me. I'm a musician, but I have to record, like I said before. So I've been trying to get better at being a recording engineer. And so say I get some good drum sounds, and that, I don't know, 12 microphones, and then the next day, instead of keeping that great drum sound, I'll take it all down and rearrange microphones and replace stuff up, and it's a mess, and I got to figure out where the cables are going and all that stuff. But that kind of exercise of, that was great yesterday, I'm going to mess it up and see if I can make something great today. And sort of thriving in that, I don't know, it's not chaos. It's really just mixing up the stuff and seeing if you can look at it differently. The Dead Poet Society, standing on the desk and looking at something from just a different perspective. It's not necessarily messy, but it is. What messy does is it allows a shift in how you're looking at things, because everything's not in order, and everything you can just look at the perspective totally differently and see where that leads. Yeah. It's also, I'm a very, on the flip side, I'm a very neat person. So after a session, I'm very particular with how I wrap up my cables and where I put my microphones, and keeping, it's kind of in a kitchen. Kitchens are made to be a mess, especially when you're making food, and then I'm a mess in the kitchen, and then I am meticulous about cleaning it on the flip side. But that's when you're done making something. But I love creating in the mess.
If anybody's afraid of trying that and making a mess, any thoughts for them?
I don't know. Allowing yourself. It has to do with allowance. I mean, this is a theme of what we're talking about. But there's absolutely nothing wrong, and possibly many things good about that you can find in a mess. Yeah.
So don't be afraid of the mess, or of the failing, or
exploration.
So many of these other things. Yeah. Not knowing where you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've kept you for a little more than an hour. So
that's all right. It was a pleasure. It was fun.
Likewise. I love where we've ended up. So
me too.
So if somebody's looking for, somebody's looking for the album, this will probably come out right after your album comes out.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere in particular that they should take a look? It's on Apple and Spotify and all those good things, or
it's on Apple and Spotify and all those good things. All those streaming, wherever people consume music, it'll be there. And it's Opus Orange is the sort of quote unquote band name, the collective name, and the latest album is Object Lessons. And that if this comes out after it came out on August 27th.
There we go. And I've listened to a couple of the songs and I really like them. So I recommend everybody check it out. That's this week's show. Many, many thanks to Paul Bessenbacher, PB, for joining me. If you found this episode thought-provoking, please do leave a review and pass it on to a friend. Thanks. You can find show notes, the 6 creative beliefs that are screwing you up, and more at fycuriosity.com. I'd also love for you to join the conversation on Instagram. You'll find me at fycuriosity. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. See you next time.